Now we're going to transition over to the defense, Trevor. So, folks, hit that like button on your way before we get over there. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And I've yet to tell you guys to do this, but today, at some point in time during the show or after the show, come join us over on the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Going to have a lot of fun conversation over there. A lot of good stuff we're discussing over there. And it's been a lot more good back and forth this last week. I think the bye week was cathartic for a lot of people. And you're watching Vanderbilt get beat by or beating Bama, and you're like, yeah, Vanderbilt's probably better than Northern Illinois. But it's like, okay, but you know what? This stuff crazy. It doesn't make the Northern Illinois game better, but you realize, like, hey, this is a crazy sport we watch, and Notre Dame's got a chance to go make some noise now if they can fix their own issues. So it's a lot more healthy conversation in that regard. So it's gonna be fun. So check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So Trevor, the last part of today's show is going to focus on the defense, and this is going to be a little bit of a quicker conversation because in a lot of ways, this is going to be more focused on just Stanford because except for one thing. And this is the notes I sent you before. I'm going to move the bottom two up to the top, and we're going to get into the specific Stanford matchup. But the big thing for me is this is the first game that we're really going to see kind of this new look defensive line that's had a week to prepare for what it's going to be without Botelho, without Boubacar Traore. Okay, what's it going to be? And at the end of the day, the defensive line has suffered some blows, but there's still a lot of talent up there, especially relative to who they're going to be playing. You're going to need some guys to step up, Trevor. This is a game where I'm very curious to see how this defense performs because, again, you're playing an offense. Let's pull this up that we're looking at earlier. At least the defense does something redeeming. The highest statistical ranking that the Stanford offense has is 71st in rushing. Then they're 79th in yards per rush. After that, the next thing they're highest in is third down offense at 90th.
Yep.
And they rank outside the top 100 in points, yards per play, yards per game total, tackle. They're almost last in the country in tackles for loss allowed. They rank 113th in sacks allowed. They're outside the top 100 in passing yards allowed, pass yards allowed per completion, passing yards per attempt, efficiency rating on offense. I'm sorry. These are offensive numbers. So it's passing yards per attempt, passing yards per completion, sacks allowed, third down offense. They're 121st in red zone offense. They're 98th with 9 turnovers in 6 games. Or excuse me, they're 2-4, correct? They only played 5 games so far, so they're 2-3. In 5 games, they've turned the ball over 9 times. This is a really bad offense. And depending on whether or not Ashton Daniels plays, which we'll get into, it makes it even worse, which is why if Ashton Daniels plays, the Virginia Tech game has no meaning to this conversation at all. Because you take Ashton Daniels off that offense, and it's not even that he's that good. It's just the rest of their quarterback room is awful, right? This is not a very good offense. So for the Notre Dame defense, it's number one. It's about come out focused and playing with fire. What's your standard? What is your want to? What is your why? Why am I coming out here and playing today? Because we are trying to prove to everyone in college football that we are the best defense in college football. The best defense in college football. I don't care who's on the other side of the field. We're going to show that we're the best defense in college football. That's the mindset that has to be there. Within that, this defensive line is going to be key to that because you now have lost what I would say is your 2 best defensive linemen through the first 6 games, in Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore. So My question is, how does this defense create – they weren't very good at creating pressures and disruptions, and you've now lost your 2 best guys at that on the edge. How does this defensive line step up? And then the other question, Trevor, and this is the big one for me, who steps up? Does Howard Cross finally become what he's supposed to be? Does Riley Mills – does R.J. Oben show up for the 2024 season? Does the light go on for Bryce Young? Can Junior Chilamaka keep doing he's doing? Does Josh Burnham start making an impact? Is it Logan Thomas? Is it Jason Onye? Is it, who's it going to be? And ideally, hopefully it's a few. It's not just one. But there's still enough talent for this D-line to still be pretty good, especially against a team like Stanford. And so we're going to find out this weekend against Stanford, Trevor, whether or not this defensive line has kind of got their heads on straight and are saying like, hey, guys, this is on – how good we're going to be the rest of the year is on us. Mm-hmm. Right? Linebackers are playing great. We got the best secondary college football. If we're not the best defense in football, it's on us. That's the mindset. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but that's the mindset they got to have, because I do think this Notre Dame defense. I mean, look at they're ranked first, second, third, or fourth, and every metric I've been able to find that looks at context, efficiency, things like that, where you take the competition into consideration, they're a top 4 defense, and I think 1 or 2 of those services rank them number 1 right now in defense. And that's with the D-line just kind of being okay. If this D-line can take that next step and kind of get it going, just if Riley and Howard just get back to being what they were last year, not even just what they were last year. If RJ Oben gets back to just being what he was the last 3 years at Duke, forget improvement, just be what you were. Then it comes down on the young guys and what they're able to prove. But that's the big key for me is if this defense is going to truly become a lockdown, dominant, elite defense, not just an elite pass defense. Because right now I think a lot of this is geared towards their elite pass defense and a sort of a solid run defense. If the D-line plays better, the run defense gets better. I don't care if Al Golden calls games the exact same way. Yeah. To me, it's as simple as that, Trevor. It comes down to that. Who steps up?
It's going to show what kind of mindset, and it's almost going to kind of confirm what we believe Al Golden's mentality is with this defense. If there's anything that I know about Al Golden, especially from what I've watched from him, especially last year, is I could see this defense coming out and just absolutely punishing Stanford because they gave up 24 points to Louisville in their last game. Now, 14 of those points came on a short field, but the standard of Notre Dame's defense is you don't allow touchdowns on those drives, right? So to your point about who's going to step up, the opportunity is served on a silver platter to RJ Oben, to Bryce Young, to the returning veterans in Howard Cross and Riley Mills, to Junior Tuialamaka, to Josh Burnham, who's going to get his opportunity, to Logan Thomas. So there's a lot of players that have the opportunity to do it. Now, there's obviously question marks around everybody that I just listed. Is Josh Burnham going to be able to come back and play post the injury? Are Howard Cross and Riley Mills going to be able to step up and be the players that we thought they were going to be preseason? Is Bryce Young going to perform to that 5-star caliber that we know? He's taken the steps to do it, but is he then going to get over that hump to start becoming an elite factor of this defense? So the opportunity's there, and similar to the conversations that we're having on the offensive side, these next 3 games are going to be telling to see who is going to be that guy that steps up on the defensive line. Because you have it in the secondary. You have, case could be made, multiple people in the secondary, Brian, to your point. So if the defensive line can get figured out, it's no longer going to be a conversation of does Notre Dame have a top pass defense, but it'll go to does Notre Dame have an elite defense as a whole. So really excited to see what these next 3 games are going to look like, specifically on the front 4.
It's kind of funny, Trevor, because coming into the season, our question was, can Notre Dame's secondary be as good as it was last year? Just as good. And the hope was that it could be just as good. Now, there's some context that needs to be had about the opposition. But so far this season, the Notre Dame secondary has been even better than it was last year. And it's been more disruptive. It's creating more breakups, more interceptions. And it's doing so with a pass rush that hasn't been as good as the one they had last year. I mean, their ability to cover has been really impressive, really impressive. And the manner in which they're just completely shutting teams down, throwing the football. I mean, gave up 264 yards to Louisville. They had 6.4 yards per attempt. They needed 41 attempts to get to that 264, and a chunk of that number was done on that final scoring drive and final drive where Notre Dame was kind of playing off and giving them certain things in the pass game because they were going to make them go on a drive, which again I hate. I don't like it, but it's football. It is what it is. But they 6.4 yards per attempt. They didn't play great against SMU this past weekend, but they had 9.4 yards per attempt against SMU on Saturday. They had 14.2 against Georgia Tech. Notre Dame held them to 6.4. Their lowest passer rating in a game outside of the Notre Dame game was 154.97. Notre Dame held them to 131.90. The SMU game was the lowest completion percentage of the season so far at 62.9. Notre Dame held them to 58.5. So, I mean, you look at it, it's not just that they handled themselves. I mean, they kept that pass game in check. And they've kind of done that every week. Now, the caveat is they haven't played anyone outside of Louisville that's really good at throwing the football. Miami's not bad for that level. And, A&M's not a great pass offense. But, I mean, they showed this – like A&M in the 5 games that they've won is averaged 7.8, 10.5, 6.0, 7.4, and 12.5 in yards per attempt. They've had a minimum of 163 yards passing in every game. They've had worst completion percentage was against Arkansas at 50. Then it's 55.2. They completed 81.2% of their throws on Saturday. Against Notre Dame, they were at 40% completion percentage. They had 100 passing yards on 30 attempts. So, like, people keep saying this, like, well, A&M is so much better now. I mean, no more than most other teams develop in 5-6 games, right? But guys, they went out and scored 52 points against McNeese State, and then scored 33 against Florida and called off the dogs against Florida in their next game. And that was with their backup quarterback. Well, Connor Wegman's so much better. Yeah, he's better now because he doesn't play Notre Dame's defense. Does Connor Wegman look like he looked on Saturday if he's playing the Notre Dame defense? No, he doesn't. This is the thing, is like, it's not a coincidence that these quarterbacks always have like their quote unquote worst games when they play Notre Dame. I mean, it's not a coincidence. Oh man, Miami of Ohio, they got beat by Toledo this weekend. They're not very good. No, they're not very good. And they got beat by Cincinnati Northwestern. They're not very good. No, they're not very good. They passed for 296 yards against Toledo, 339 yards against Cincinnati, and 227 yards against Northwestern. They passed for 119 against Notre Dame. So, like, the numbers aren't even anywhere close to what they're doing against other teams. So, yes, they're not playing great pass offenses, but they're absolutely dominating inferior pass offenses. Like, that has been incredibly impressive with this secondary. And they did it against Louisville without their starting field cornerback, who's been, I would argue, every bit as good as Benjamin Morrison. Maybe you could say Benjamin's been slightly better. Some people would argue Christian's been slightly better. The fact is they've both been phenomenal.
Yep.
So far this season. And you played that whole game without him, and you replaced him with a freshman, and your junior backup cornerback that was your rotation guy that played in all those other games quit the team the week before. And you still went out and did what you did against Louisville. This is an elite secondary. It's absolutely an elite secondary. But an elite secondary playing against Texas and Ohio State and those type of teams is going to give up plays if you can't rush the quarterback. And that's the big key for me. That's the one thing that I look at this defense and say in the second half of the season, Trevor, that I need to see from this defense is they do so many things so well, but they're not disruptive enough when it comes to the things that you do with your front seven. They're incredibly disruptive in the pass game from a breakups and interceptions. You pointed that out the other day, Trevor. They're on pace to blow away their numbers from last year. Blow away those numbers. But Notre Dame right now ranks 106th in tackles for loss. And they rank 37th in sacks. That has to change, and it has to change without your two most disruptive edge players. That's the life. So you can either say, well, tough break. It is what it is. We're just going to pack it in and build for 2025. Or you say, hey, listen, don't care. You're replacing, like, think about it. You're replacing Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patelho in the lineup with guys like Josh Burnham and Bryce Young, Junior Tilamaka, Logan Thomas. These are talented football players. They're a little younger, some of them, but they're talented football players, Trevor. And you still have your two dudes at defensive tackle. And you're going to be getting Gabriel Rubio back soon. So who's going to step up with those guys out? When Patelho stepped up, went out, who's going to step up? Boubacar was like, I got you, coach. I'm going to step up. And he dominated the next two games. And he got hurt. Okay, now Boubacar's down. Who's going to step up? right? Hopefully it's a unit approach, but somebody's going to have to step up and shut it down. And that's really the only question I have about this defense in the second half of the year, Trevor, because that is going to impact. We could talk run defense has got to get better. We could talk about they got to be more disruptive, and all, but that all comes down to the D-line. The D-line playing better. That's what that at the end of the day, that's it. Al Washington's unit, to me, is going to determine whether this is an outstanding top 5 to 10 defense, or if this is a truly, hey, we can win a championship because of this defense. That's what's going to be determined. And man, I'm looking forward to seeing it, because that's that. But again, that's the only really the question. As long as they just keep doing what you're doing, that's the only thing that to me that could determine could really knock this team off from where they are is that right there. That's it.
Similar to how we talked about Notre Dame's offense taking advantage of Stanford's really bad pass defense, is that going to right the ship and say that Notre Dame is now ready to compete with Ohio State? No, I'm not saying that in the slightest, but they have the chance to take the step in the right direction, and they have the same opportunity to do that against Stanford. They're tied 113th in the country in sacks allowed. They've allowed 15 sacks through 5 games. And it's one of those where we can look at and say after the game, if Notre Dame's not able to get after the quarterback against this team, no matter who's lining up at Viper, no matter who's lining up at D end, and no matter who's in the rotation to defensive tackle, that's going to be where, similar to the offensive side, we just look back and say, I guess Notre Dame's just not going to be able to get after the quarterback this year, right? So it's going to be a lot of opportunity. And I think that sums up the defensive portion pretty well, is there's opportunity all around, right? Like, this isn't a question of, well, if Notre Dame's defense doesn't bring their A game, Stanford's throwing up 30. It's not that at all. But it's about taking the necessary right steps, loaded with opportunity. It starts at the defensive line. And it's going to be even more paramount for a head coach that claims that this is an offensive and defensive line driven team. Now you have a much bigger opportunity to go out and prove, hey, we are still a trenches driven program, and we're starting to show it.
I'm going to make a statement, and you tell me if you agree or disagree with it. Okay? And I want people in the chat to tell me the same thing. Marcus Freeman has a lot of sayings. One of those is we're going to be a offensive and defensive line driven program. I would argue, now I understand there's reasons why on both sides of the ball, but I would argue that through 5 games as a whole, your least effective position on offense has been your offensive line, and your least effective position on defense has been your defensive line. Now, your defensive line is still good. Like, the defensive line has not been bad this year. They've been solid. Linebackers getting way better, and the secondary has been elite. So a line-driven program, you could look at the 2 different sides of the ball and say, but your lines are arguably your weakest spot. I would say they're the weakest, but no one can tell me. You may argue another position. Some people say quarterback, but it's in the conversation. I think we can all at least agree it's in the conversation for being the weak spot on both sides of the ball. That has to change. It has to change. Because on defense, it's like, look, something's got to be your weakest, right, Trevor? I mean, something's got – but I would argue – but there's a big gap between what the D-line has done and what the secondary's done. The D-line needs to close that gap. Needs to close that gap in a big way. And if they can, you know, I don't know how you move the ball on this team. I really don't. Agreed. I mean, it may seem hyperbolic, but I don't know how you move the ball on this team. And they don't play like any like elite offenses they play good offenses in the final 7 games. Georgia Tech's good offense. Army Navy are rolling right now. USC's a good offense, but there's no Ohio State 2022 on their schedule. There's no LSU 19. There's no Clemson 18 in like the playoff team. There's no T. Higgins, Justin Ross coming down the pike on your schedule. You know, there's no CJ Stroud on your schedule in the last 7 games. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no Marvin Harrison Jr. on your, I mean, you could argue you've played the best receiving core you're going to play all year, and you could argue that you might have played the best passing quarterback you've played all year already. And Tyler Shuck. I mean, we'll see what Miller Moss can do. Haynes King is the most dynamic quarterback that they play in a traditional offense, although Bryce Daly and the Horvath kid at Navy have been pretty freaking good in their offenses. But you get what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing, Trevor, is like if the D-line can just start playing better, this defense becomes truly special. And it starts in this game because I think you nailed it. This is an offense that's given up. They rank 97th in sacks allowed this year. They rank 100. Was it? I'm sorry. Sacks allowed, they rank 113th. In tackles for loss allowed, they rank 130th. There's only 134 teams in college football, Trevor. It's like, I think, I love that you said that. It's like the pass offense. If not now, when? You know what I mean? But that comes down to how hungry are you about this game? Are you looking at, this team sucks, we're going to do our – or you're like, oh, my God, I can't – I'm chomping at the bit. Like, I want to go out there and show that I'm this. I want to do this. I want to dominate. Like, that's the thing is, where's your desire to just dominate? Doesn't matter who the opponent is. I want to dominate. I'm hungry to dominate. And I don't see – this team is like, I want to dominate if it's a good team. You know what I mean? Like, turn the light on when it's a good – no, I want to see you – every chance you get to step on the football field, you want to just humiliate your opponent in the right way, right? Not with stupid, gun signs and things like that, but just I'm going to dominate you because every single play I'm knocking your face into the ground because I'm drilling you. I'm just whipping your butt I'm beating you to the quarterback every play. Like that's the hunger I want to see from this defense. And I'm very curious how the Louisville game how they're going to react to the Louisville game. Because I saw it was not their best. It was actually, I would argue, the worst performance of the defense we've seen all season from an executing your assignments standpoint. I would argue that. I would say that they made more mental mistakes in that game than any other. They made up for it because A, they're super talented, but B, they played with a ton of edge and fire. Just how a lot of young guys making mistakes. But if they can carry over sort of that fire, I mean, even Riley Mills, Howard Cross, like RJ Oben played hard. He was okay against Louisville, but he played hard. There's no doubt about that. If they can carry over that energy into this game, Trevor, then I think we will see this D-line for at least this week take a big step, and hopefully it vaults them into being fired up about next week because the next two games are going to be huge for this D-line after Stanford, and they need to get some kind of positivity going into that matchup against Georgia Tech and Navy.
100%.
So let's talk about this specific matchup, Trevor, because we don't know what version of Stanford is going to show up on Saturday. I'm assuming that Ashton Daniels is going to play. But if you're Stanford, you got a really interesting decision to make because you can't beat Notre Dame without Ashton Daniels. Zero chance. Zero. But you probably only got about a 5% chance to beat Notre Dame with Ashton Daniels unless Notre Dame just doesn't show up. Right? Do you risk him potentially getting hurt again, this time maybe worse, against the best defense you're going to face all year? And, oh, by the way, he got hurt against the second best defense he's going to play all year because he was getting beat up a lot in that Clemson game. Do you risk saying, hey, we're going to sit him out this game as well, let him get healthier because we've got, we've got a chance to, coming out of this, you got SMU at home and you got Wake Forest at home. Maybe you can kind of get some things going a little bit. Or do you say, hey, let's put them out there, not 100%? But I'll say this, their offense is not very good right now. It's really not good when he doesn't play. And so, we pulled up a lot of the rankings that they had. A lot of those rankings, they were never great on offense this year. But a lot of that came down to this past game. I mean, they went for 258 yards in the game. They only had 3.9 yards per play. They had 103 less yards at home against Virginia Tech than they had on the road against Clemson. That's not because Virginia Tech's defense is lights out. It's because they didn't have Ashton Daniels. Now, I don't know that they would have won because their defense couldn't stop Virginia Tech, but it would have been a more competitive game. He's a good, solid quarterback, but for them, he's the key that makes everything go. And if he doesn't play, they're in big, big trouble, Trevor.
Yeah, Ashton Daniels is the key to that offense's success. Ashton Daniels to that Stanford offense is what Riley Leonard was to Duke's offense last year. If he's not in, the offense just doesn't go. And I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly. Now, I don't think that, to your point with Ashton Daniels, I don't think Stanford has a crazy chance to win. It's definitely not zero, just based on what we've seen,
If he plays?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, correct. That's why I said 5% if he plays.
Yeah, totally. And
I would take Andrew Hendricks over their backup quarterback.
Yeah. I'm with you. I just with Ashton Daniels, he does a lot on the ground. He is a dynamic playmaker. It is no secret that Stanford is better when the ball is in his hands. He's the team's leading rusher as far as carries and yards go. And as far as rushing attempts, not too far behind him is their backup. Now, he had 19 carries against Virginia Tech, and I think he has 37 on the season.
Because that's what he does. He's their short yardage guy. They bring him into every game in short yardage situations. He had a fumble against Clemson early in the game because they brought him in I think it was like third and one.
Right. Yeah.
I think, and he fumbled it. I mean, that's what they do with him.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. 100%. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what the Stanford offense looks like with or without him, because this is by far the best defense that they're going to face. Clemson is definitely the second best, but Notre Dame across the board by far is going to be the best defense that Stanford faces all year. So no idea what they're going to be able to do without him. With him, game plan goes around. I think he's number 14. Game plan goes around Ashton Daniels for sure.
I gotta say, Trevor, they have 2 freshman running backs on their team that I like. I do. I now one of them is, you know, you had mentioned in a text to me that one of them, the Micah Ford kid, is questionable because he left the game against Virginia Tech with an injury.
Yep.
He's a good little back. Yep. And then the other kid, Chris Davis, is again a pretty good running back. I mean, you look at the Micah Ford kid. He's got 230 yards rushing in 5 games. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. Chris Davis is averaging 7.2 yards per carry. Now you may say, like, that's not lighting the world on fire, but guys, their leading 3 rushers last year averaged 2.8, 2.7, and 4.1 yards per carry. You know, Stanford last year averaged 118.6 yards per game rushing, 3.5 yards per carry. This year they're at 157 yards rushing and 4.2 yards per carry. And that was with them only going for 136 against Virginia Tech because, again, they didn't have Ashton Daniels. They rushed for 236 yards on Clemson. You know, they ran for 173 at Syracuse. Like they're decent for that level running the football because the quarterback is a weapon. But when you focus on 14, as you said, Ashton Daniels, then you're not paying as much attention to those 2 freshman running backs who are good football players. And Clemson had that. Clemson was really locking in on him. And early in the game, Ford had a couple really nice bounces in that game. There was one short yardage bounce where Clemson kind of crashed down and he bounced it out for a nice game. Like, he's a good running back. And the problem with those 2 backs is their offensive line's not very good. That's one of the issues they have is their offensive line's not very good. But we've seen some teams that don't have great offensive lines get a little bit of a push on Notre Dame with their run game. But if you don't have 14, then I mean, they become even more one-dimensional than they are because now they don't have the ability to get the ball to their dude at receiver. And we'll talk more about him tomorrow. But it's not a coincidence that he had his lowest yardage total of the season in the one game without Ashton Daniels. It's not a coincidence because the kid just can't throw the football.
Right.
So 100%. That's going to be the key. If he doesn't play, this becomes like almost an unfair matchup with the Notre Dame defense against the Stanford offense. It really does. So we'll find out. But if he plays, then this is going to be a good test for Notre Dame, who has not been a great rush defense this season. They're not bad. They're just solid, in my opinion. Some of it's kind of they give it. But if you have to contain him plus the 2 backs, now we get to find out if Notre Dame made some adjustments in the run game with their run defense. And that's something I'm very curious to see. So if we assume that he's going to play, and tomorrow when we break the game down, Trevor, we're going to do the matchup as if we expect Ashton Daniels to play and break it down that way. But just kind of looking at it here, when you talk about what we want to see from this defense, I want to see them be a little – I don't care that they hold teams to 75 yards rushing a game. That's not who they are going to be. I'm not going to ask them to be something that they don't want to be, right? It's like I can't ask you to live up to a standard that you don't have for yourself, and it's just my preference because at 46 years old, I grew up being told to be an elite defense, you have to stop the run. Okay, that's fine. You got to be a good run defense, but you don't have to be what it used to be because the game has changed. You know, like there's certain teams like, fine, you want to put all your resources stopping the run. That's kind of what we want you to do, you know? So In this instance, it's more about you got to be better against the run. And if Ashton Daniels plays, that gives you a chance to be tested by a pretty mobile quarterback and a pretty decent group of running backs, which is great preparation for what you're going to face next week when you got to defend Haynes King and Jamal Haynes and that group. And so that's why I'm actually kind of hoping that Ashton Daniels is healthy and plays, because he's going to give you a great look for next week. Now, Lamson's actually a pretty good athlete. That's why they bring him in as a runner. But he's like zero threat as a passer, in my opinion. And so it doesn't really give you a look, because Haynes King's actually throwing the ball pretty well this year. Like, he's improved as a passer. And he's got some pretty good weapons. So you kind of hope Ashton Daniels is healthy in that regard, just because he's going to give you a good look. But I do really want to see how this run defense performs coming out of the break with sort of a new look group. Because if you think about it, the guys that are playing now at defensive end should be more run guys, like Josh Burnham and Junior Tomaka are kind of more run defenders first and pass rushers second, and makes it kind of interesting. But that's my thing for the defense, Trevor. I need to see this defensive line or I need to see this defense just give me a little something more in the run defense, just a little something more. And I'm curious to see what the game plan is going to be from Al Golden against a team like this. Do you just say, hey, listen, we're going to bracket number 10 and just kind of take him out of the game, and then they got nothing? Or do you say, hey, we trust Morrison and Gray to go against them one-on-one, and we're going to, put an extra hat down in the box to make sure the quarterback doesn't hurt us running the football? Like, it's going to be interesting to see how he comes out and defends Stanford. Like last year, he just said, hey, I'm going to trust in my corners to match up against this guy. And I think they did well, but they had some miss. I mean, they had the big wheel route out of the backfield to E.J. Smith that went for 50-something yards. There was just some stuff like that happened. You're just like, what are they doing? And so, yeah, number 13 is the receiver. But that's the thing, Trevor, is I want to see number 10's Emmett Mosley. I should know that. But that's what I want to see, is like, what's the game plan? What are you going to do schematically to match up against this defense, which is a little bit different? I mean, it's a very different offense structurally and schematically from what you just faced. Because the last two teams you've played are pass first, run second teams, especially Miami of Ohio. This is a polar opposite. And they're a run first, run second, throw the ball to, A. Manor, and that's pretty much where they're at. That's their offense.
Yeah,
So
their offense, outside of the handful of running backs they have, they don't have a lot of depth. They're not going to do a whole lot of rotating players in. I mean, speaking of rotating players in, I am going to be interested to see like situational rotations for Notre Dame's defense on Saturday and what that's going to look like with the more limited depth that you have at defensive line. It does help that Josh Burnham is coming back, but I'm going to be interested to see, based on what the strengths of those players are. To your point, Junior Tuialamaka and Josh Burnham are more like run first stoppers. So going to be interested to see who comes in on those third down, obvious passing situations. Now, depending on who starts for Stanford at quarterback, I don't know if they are going to have obvious pass situations, because their backup quarterback is just not throwing the ball is not one of his strong suits. So we're going to see what that looks like. But yeah, I'm interested to see overall, but Notre Dame's defense, again, has an opportunity to go out and prove again why they're one of the best, if not the best, defenses in the country.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So that's really it with them, Trevor. It's just, okay, do you show up and play hard? Do you play with fire and energy? If you do, they're going to keep Stanford in check. How much do you keep them in check and, focus and all this kind of stuff? But I'm also very curious to see what kind of jump the young linebackers make with a bye, where they kind of get a look at film and stop and think and, talk through things. And, does that help them get better? Do they take a jump? All that kind of stuff is, Christian Gray's going to have fresh legs after, Macy missing the last 2 weeks since he didn't no game this past week. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of what they do. And there's a lot of young kids that you never know with young players, Trevor. Sometimes young players look at a bye week and it's like they're not focused. They're not locked in. It's like, cool, I get away from football. And then others are like, hey, I want to get in the lab a little bit and see how I can improve my game. And, I never really thought, because things are just happening so fast, you don't get to do a lot of reflecting. Like, by the time you get to Monday, it's your film's on next opponent, next opponent, next opponent. The great thing about a bye is you get to say, let me look back at those 5 games and kind of see what I did and see where I can get better and see what, okay, teams keep doing this to me. And every time they do this to me, I fall for it and I get beat or something like that. So I'm curious to see what kind of impact that's going to have about this group as well, with Drake and Kingston and Jaden Osbury and hopefully Jalen Sneed and those kind of guys. It's going to be interesting to see how they perform, because if they build on what we saw this past weekend, meaning just clean up some of the mistakes, this linebacking core is going to be it's already been fun to watch. It's going to be even more so coming down the stretch. So, all right, Trevor, we did have a super chat before we get out of here. We had a super chat from Mark 1. He says, thank you for the super chat, Mark 1. He goes, like what you guys do. Hope you enjoyed the pictures I sent back home on my visit back home to South Bend. So, Mark, I am not sure. I don't know if you put some pictures on the Facebook page or what. I'm not quite sure what pictures you're talking about, but hopefully you had a pretty good time with all being back home in South Bend. So I'm sorry that I did not get a chance to see those, and I will go look for those, but I'm not sure. I am a little backed up on emails, so maybe that's it. Maybe send an email, but if you could point me in the direction of where you sent those, I'd really appreciate that. But I definitely appreciate the super chat for sure. For sure. I appreciate that very much. So, Trevor, that's going to do it for today's show, man. So, big game this weekend. It's going to be fun. We're going to dive even deeper into the specific matchups of Notre Dame and Stanford tomorrow. Not so much the big picture, but the specific matchups. But I got to tell you, man, I part of me wishes that this weekend's schedule was the last weekend.
I know.
Because there was crazy upsets this past weekend, but this weekend's just going to be just as far as better teams. So, I mean, dude, it's Texas, Oklahoma, Penn State at USC. You've got Florida, Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU, Iowa State at West Virginia, K-State at Colorado. Even Friday night, the Utah State at Arizona State game. We're going to talk about these on Thursday, but there's a couple Big 12 matchups where I'm upset alert, with some of these matchups in the Big 12. There's 3 games that you could see a ranked team on the road in a game where you're that's not going to be an easy win. So, man, I do wish I had a chance to watch more of that live this weekend. Alas, I will not, because I will basically be at Notre Dame from noon to, 8, 9 o'clock. So, but man, it's going to be a fun weekend for Notre Dame and the rest of college football.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to have to silence the notifications on my phone. We have a family dinner with the in-laws. It's my mother-in-law's and my grandpa-in-law's birthday on Saturday. So we'll be back in Cincinnati, and I think the dinner starts at 7. So
yeah.
So I'll have to silence the notifications on the phone so nothing gets spoiled for me. But I hear you.
Yes.
I do wish this slate was this past. Yeah.
I'm gonna be texting you like crazy with updates from the game. Oh man, did you see? I'll be even giving you fake updates. Oh my gosh, did you see that play from whoever? And yeah, I can't believe Oklahoma looks this good. They're actually down 30. Let's have some fun with you.
Just stuff that would never happen. Can't believe Jeremiah Smith has 200 passing yards in the first half.
Yes, seriously, Oregon is locking Jeremiah Smith down. He can't get open. He's got 3 catches for 2 touchdowns. I'm gonna have some fun with you. So anyway. But, hey, guys, that's going to do it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, normal time tomorrow. I'm not going to get into it, but just a really rough weekend at our house, and so we needed some time to recover today, and so we got started a little bit late. But tomorrow we start at 1. Thursday we'll start at 1. Friday we'll start at 1, and that's definitely the plan for the rest of the week. And we'll have a little different lineup for you for the postgame show. As Trevor alluded to, he will not be part of the postgame show on Saturday. But we're going to have some fun, Trevor, and hopefully Notre Dame goes out there and gets another win, proves the 5-0, and that gives them another shot because you've basically got 3 games before the first playoff ranking comes out, because the playoff ranking comes out during the Tuesday after their bye.
Yep.
So it's the Tuesday before the Florida State game, which starts their last 4-game stretch, because it's Florida State, Virginia, Army, USC. So the first playoff ranking comes out the week before the Florida State game, so after their bye. So you got Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy left to make an impact on the playoff committee with what you do, not what happens to other people, with what you do. Right. So it is an important stretch. It may not seem like it, but before you know it, we're going to be sitting there having a Tuesday night show breaking down the playoff rankings. And so you may not like it, but Notre Dame has to have that in mind when they're, Marcus Freeman's making decisions on, okay, when do we stop throwing the ball? When do we put in our backups? how great are we going to be? Like, how bad do we want to bury this team? Those type of things. You need to do a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, you have to do a little bit of that. So we're going to find out if they're able to do that. So that's all the topic conversation this week. Tons of Notre Dame Stanford talk. I'm excited about it. I know Trevor's fired up about it. Appreciate y'all being with us, folks. On your way out, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, make sure you head over to our premium board. That's the place to be, the VIP place at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.